I never imagined that the woman I loved could become the architect of my despair. My name is Jonathan Reed, and I am both the author and the unwilling witness to the slow disintegration of what once felt like an unbreakable bond. I remember the first time I noticed that something was amiss. It wasn't a dramatic display of betrayal, it was a subtle change, a missed smile here, a distracted glance there, until the realization sank in like a stone in my chest. It began on an ordinary autumn evening when I returned home early from work. The golden sunlight had just dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows in our living room. I found my wife, Isabel, sitting on the couch with a smartphone pressed close to her ear, her eyes not meeting mine. I paused at the doorway, a gnawing uncertainty clawing at my insides. "Who are you talking to?" I asked, trying to hide the tremor in my voice. Her quick, evasive answer made it clear that she was protecting a secret that I would later come to understand was the foundation of my heartbreak. In the days that followed, little things piled up like the fallen leaves outside our home. Isabel became increasingly distant, retreating into a world of hushed phone calls and whispered conversations. I began to question if I was losing her, piece by piece, to someone else. I reminded myself that every relationship faces its challenges, but deep within, I knew something far graver was unfolding. The silence between us grew thick and suffocating, a silent scream in a night filled with unsaid words and unanswered questions. I started staying late at the office, partly to escape the unsettling tension at home, partly to avoid the painful confrontation that I dreaded. In the quiet solitude of my cubicle, I'd replay moments from our shared past, the laughter during our early dates, the promises made under starlit skies, and the dreams we nurtured together. Every memory now felt like a cruel reminder of the love that had once bound us, and the betrayal that was steadily eroding that trust. With every passing day, I felt the chasm widening between us, a gap filled with mistrust and sorrow. One evening, unable to bear the mounting uncertainty any longer, I confronted Isabel. I asked her directly if there was someone else. Her eyes flickered with a mix of fear and resignation, and in that fleeting moment, I saw the truth reflected in them. She confessed that she had been meeting someone, a colleague, a confidant, someone who had offered her an escape from the monotony of our daily lives. The shock was paralyzing. I felt as if the ground had shifted beneath me, leaving me stranded in a reality I could neither accept nor comprehend. As I listened to her confession, a storm of emotions raged inside me. There was anger, yes, burning fiercely with every word she uttered. But there was also a profound sense of loss, a mourning for the future we had envisioned together. I questioned every moment of our past, wondering if I had been blind to the signs that led to this inevitable betrayal. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that perhaps I had been too complacent, too absorbed in the comfort of familiarity to notice the cracks forming in our foundation. Over the following weeks, my life became a series of solitary reflections and bitter realizations. I roamed through the empty corridors of our home, each room echoing with memories that now felt foreign. The photographs on the walls, once symbols of our shared happiness, now seemed like relics of a bygone era, a time when trust was not a casualty of silence. I began to document my feelings in a journal, trying to piece together a narrative of betrayal and sorrow, but the words often betrayed me, failing to capture the raw intensity of my pain. There were nights when I would sit by the window, watching the rain trace lonely patterns on the glass, mirroring the disarray in my heart. In those quiet moments, I questioned the very nature of love. How could something so beautiful turn into a weapon of destruction? I questioned whether I was at fault, wondering if there had been moments when I could have been more attentive, more understanding. But even as I grappled with these doubts, a part of me knew that the fault lay not with me but with the deceit that had slithered into our lives uninvited. Isabel, too, changed during this period. The woman I once knew, a kind, vibrant soul with dreams as vast as the sky, was gradually replaced by someone I could hardly recognize. Her laughter, once the melody of my everyday life, now carried an undertone of regret and disinterest. I began to see her not as a partner, but as a stranger whose presence was a constant reminder of my shattered trust. The conversations that once flowed easily between us turned into stilted exchanges, each word measured and heavy with unspoken truths. One evening, after a particularly long day filled with unrelenting thoughts, I stumbled upon a box hidden in the back of our closet. Inside were mementos of a past I no longer wished to remember, ticket stubs from our first concert together, handwritten notes of affection, and photographs capturing moments of joy. Each item was a relic of a time when hope was not yet tainted by betrayal. I sat there for hours, holding on to these fragments of a life that seemed irretrievably lost, while the weight of the present pressed down on me like an unbearable burden. It is said that time heals all wounds, but as the days turned into weeks, I found that time only deepened the wounds rather than healing them. The betrayal had become a part of my identity, a constant echo in my mind that I could neither silence nor ignore. Every time I looked at Isabel, I saw not the woman I had loved, but a reminder of how fragile our bonds truly were. Despite the pain, there was a glimmer of resolve emerging from within me, a determination to reclaim the dignity that had been stripped away by deceit. I began to seek solace in my work and in the simple pleasures of solitude, gradually learning to live with the bitterness of betrayal. Yet, even as I tried to move forward, the specter of what had been lost loomed large, a permanent scar etched into my soul. This is where our story begins, at the precipice of irreversible change. I stand here, burdened with memories of a love that has turned sour, and a future that promises nothing but uncertainty. The road ahead is shrouded in darkness, and I have no idea if I will ever find my way back to the light. But one thing is certain, the life I once knew is gone, replaced by a harsh reality that I must face alone. In the depths of this despair, I cannot help but wonder, was it ever possible for us to overcome this chasm of betrayal? The answer remains elusive, hidden beneath layers of regret and resentment. Yet, as I pen down these thoughts, I know that the journey towards healing has only just begun. My heart is heavy with the weight of shattered dreams, and the path to redemption is as uncertain as the wind. The more I reflect on the past, the clearer it becomes that the end of our union is inevitable, a hostile separation that seems both necessary and heartbreaking. I close this chapter of my life with a mix of sorrow and resolve, knowing that every ending is merely the prelude to a new beginning. The bonds of love have been severed, and in their place lies an expanse of loneliness, a void that promises only the harsh truth of betrayal. And so, as I brace myself for the days to come, I take my first tentative steps towards a future defined not by the past, but by the possibility of redemption and self-discovery. After that fateful night of confession, the days that followed became a relentless struggle against a tide of disillusionment and despair. I, Jonathan Reed, found myself thrust into a chaotic world where every moment was tinged with bitterness and sorrow. The once familiar contours of our home now appeared as a maze of memories and unspoken grievances, a constant reminder that the life I had built with Isabel was irreversibly altered. Mornings lost their gentle grace, replaced instead by a harsh, unyielding reality. I would wake to the sound of silence, the absence of Isabel's warm greeting echoing like an empty promise. The house, once our sanctuary, had transformed into a battleground where every object seemed to whisper remnants of happier times. I attempted to navigate the day with a facade of normalcy, but inside, the tumult was unrelenting. I felt as if I were trapped in a waking nightmare, a perpetual cycle of longing for what was and mourning for what could never be again. At work, I found little solace. The routine tasks and constant chatter of colleagues were a stark contrast to the storm raging in my heart. Even the achievements I once celebrated felt hollow. Every congratulatory word from my boss or friendly exchange with a coworker only deepened the sense of isolation. My mind was consumed by images of Isabel's distant eyes and the half-truths she had once offered. I began to question whether I had ever truly known the woman I married or if the love we shared was merely a mirage, a beautifully constructed illusion destined to crumble. Despite the overwhelming urge to wallow in despair, I tried to force myself into some semblance of normalcy. I took long walks through the city, hoping that the rhythmic cadence of my footsteps might drown out the persistent echoes of betrayal. During these solitary journeys, I encountered strangers whose lives seemed full of purpose and hope. Their resilience stirred something within me, a faint, almost imperceptible glimmer of determination that perhaps I, too, could find a way to rebuild my shattered existence. However, every time I returned home, reality crashed over me like a relentless tide. The silence in our living room, the stillness of the kitchen, and the vacant look in Isabel's eyes were stark reminders that something essential had been lost. There were moments when I felt an inexplicable pull to confront her once more, to seek an explanation for the betrayal that had so violently upended our lives. Yet, each time I gathered the courage to speak, the words caught in my throat, leaving only a heavy silence in their wake. One evening, as twilight bled into the dark of night, I decided that I could no longer endure the unbearable ambiguity. I sat across from Isabel at the dining table, the air thick with tension and unspoken accusations. "Isabel," I began, my voice wavering with a mixture of anger and despair, "why did this happen? How did we get to this point?" Her eyes, once so full of life, now looked distant and burdened by secrets. For a long, agonizing moment, she said nothing. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years, she began to speak. Her voice was low, almost melancholic, as she tried to articulate the myriad emotions that had driven her into the arms of another. She spoke of loneliness, of feeling trapped in a monotonous routine, and of an overwhelming desire to escape the confines of a life that no longer fulfilled her. As she talked, I listened with a mix of incredulity and heartbreak, realizing that the woman I had loved was slowly, irrevocably slipping away from the person I once knew. The conversation did not yield any answers, only deepened the chasm between us, reinforcing the reality that our once vibrant union was now marred by betrayal and regret. In the days that followed our confrontation, the tension in the house grew palpable. Each interaction became a careful dance around a minefield of emotions, every word measured, every glance loaded with unspoken accusations. I tried to occupy myself with work, hobbies, and even long walks in the hope that time would dull the sharp edges of my pain. But the scars were fresh, and the betrayal was a constant companion, lurking in the recesses of my mind. I began to reflect on the nature of trust and love. How did we, two people who once shared dreams of a bright future, become so irreparably divided? The questions multiplied, each one more painful than the last. I found myself writing again, pouring my anguish into pages that bore witness to a love lost and a future that seemed increasingly bleak. The act of writing became both a catharsis and a torment, a way to confront the raw, unfiltered truth of my shattered heart. There were moments when I sought the counsel of old friends, those who had known me before the love that once defined me took over my life. Their words, though well-intentioned, could do little to mend the deep fissures that had formed between my past and present. They spoke of forgiveness and moving on, but the idea of reconciling with a betrayal so profound seemed both impossible and, at times, even undesirable. How could I ever forgive the woman who had once been my confidant, my partner in dreams, for a transgression that had forever marred our shared history? One particularly cold evening, as rain battered the windows and the world outside blurred into a monochrome of despair, I found myself staring at a single photograph of us, two smiling figures captured in a moment of pure joy, a stark contrast to the agony of the present. The image was a cruel reminder of the love that had once been, a love that now felt like a distant memory. I knew that clinging to the past would only anchor me further in sorrow, yet the thought of releasing those memories was equally unbearable. In the midst of this internal turmoil, I began to notice subtle shifts in Isabel's behavior. She seemed increasingly withdrawn, her laughter becoming rarer and her eyes more distant. It was as if she were retreating into herself, distancing her soul from the remnants of a love that no longer held meaning. The silence between us grew not only in the physical space of our shared home but also in the emotional distance that threatened to become insurmountable. The turning point came one day when I stumbled upon a message on Isabel's phone, a message from the man who had become a silent presence in her life. The words were casual, yet their implication was profound, confirming what I had long suspected. The betrayal was no longer shrouded in half-truths or evasion, it was laid bare in stark digital text. In that moment, I realized that the rift between us had widened beyond repair. The trust that once formed the foundation of our union had been shattered, and no amount of regret or apologies could rebuild it. I confronted her once again, the evidence of her infidelity a damning testament to our broken vows. This time, the confrontation was laced with a cold, resolute finality. Isabel's defenses crumbled under the weight of undeniable proof, and the conversation turned into a painful reckoning. There was no room for ambiguity, no possibility of reconciliation. The bitter reality was that our love, once a beacon of hope and promise, had been consumed by the flames of betrayal. As the days bled into weeks, the silence in our home grew more oppressive, culminating in an atmosphere of inevitable separation. I began to pack a few belongings, each item a painful reminder of the life we had shared, a life that now belonged to a past best left behind. The house, once a symbol of our shared dreams, had become a mausoleum of memories, each corner echoing with the ghosts of what once was. In those final, solitary moments before the impending departure, I sat alone in the quiet of our empty living room, grappling with the overwhelming realization that the man I once was now a stranger to the world. The love that had once defined my existence had been irrevocably tainted, and the future lay ahead as an uncertain, desolate landscape. I was left to wonder if, amidst the ruins of betrayal, there might someday emerge a chance for renewal. Yet, in that cold, unyielding moment, all I could see was the end, a hostile parting that would forever mark the conclusion of our shared journey. In the weeks following that damning confrontation, the atmosphere around me shifted into a state of surreal isolation. I found myself at the precipice of a new reality, one where the vestiges of a shared life with Isabel were fading into shadows of regret. The home we once nurtured together was now a battleground for memories, and every corner echoed with the whispers of lost promises. I, Jonathan Reed, had to come to terms with the finality of our shattered relationship, a process that was as brutal as it was inevitable. The initial days of separation were marked by an overwhelming sense of solitude. I spent countless hours alone, wandering through the empty rooms, trying to reconcile the fragments of a past life with the raw, painful truth of my present. Every personal item I touched, every photograph I glanced at, was a stark reminder of what once was, a love that had been both my sanctuary and my undoing. In these solitary moments, I found that the silence of our home was not just the absence of Isabel's voice but also the absence of a future that we had once envisioned together. Despite the crushing loneliness, I felt an odd liberation in the finality of our parting. The rupture in our relationship forced me to confront my own identity, independent of the intertwined lives we had built. I began to spend more time reflecting on who I was before the constant shadow of our shared history had consumed me. It was as though the betrayal had stripped away the layers of pretense, leaving behind the raw, unadulterated truth of my own desires and vulnerabilities. Yet, this newfound self-awareness was a double-edged sword. While it offered a path to potential healing, it also deepened the void that Isabel's absence had created. The legal proceedings that followed our emotional collapse only compounded the sense of isolation. I found myself entangled in a bureaucratic labyrinth, where every document and signature seemed to formalize the end of our union rather than mend a broken heart. The sterile environment of the courthouse was a far cry from the warmth we had once shared, and each step forward in the legal process felt like a deliberate march towards a future defined by separation rather than reconciliation. I watched as our shared assets were meticulously divided, each item catalogued as a relic of a failed dream. The process was methodical and devoid of the passion that had once animated our every interaction, a reminder that love, when reduced to legalities, loses its soul. At times, I would catch myself revisiting old memories with a bittersweet longing. I recalled the days when laughter and spontaneity had been the cornerstones of our relationship. We had been inseparable, sharing secrets, ambitions, and quiet moments of joy. Now, those memories were tainted by the betrayal that had transformed every affectionate glance into a painful reminder of deceit. I would sit in the park where we once spent lazy afternoons, the sound of children playing and distant conversations mingling with the rustle of leaves. In that setting, nature itself seemed indifferent to my anguish, offering no solace to the man grappling with the aftermath of a love turned sour. During this tumultuous period, I turned to old habits for comfort. I picked up my guitar again, a relic from simpler times when music was the language of my soul, and began to strum chords that resonated with the deep-seated pain and longing I felt. The act of playing became both a catharsis and a quiet rebellion against the forces that had dismantled my life. Each note, though tinged with melancholy, carried the weight of my emotions, a silent testament to the agony of betrayal and the stubborn desire to reclaim a semblance of control over my destiny. However, the nights were the hardest. Alone in my now desolate apartment, I found my mind revisiting every detail of our unraveling. Sleep was elusive, and each restless night was punctuated by a torrent of memories and regrets. I would lie awake, questioning whether I had overlooked the signs or if perhaps there was something inherently flawed in the promises of forever. In those moments, the pain of isolation merged with a gnawing sense of self-doubt, leaving me to wonder if I had been complicit in my own downfall by clinging to a love that was never as solid as I had believed. As the days turned into weeks, I began to explore the vast terrain of my emotions more deeply. I kept a journal, meticulously recording my thoughts and the gradual evolution of my inner life. The pages bore witness to a transformation that was as agonizing as it was enlightening, a journey from the depths of despair to a cautious, tentative hope. In the written word, I found a measure of control over the chaos that had engulfed my world. The act of writing, once a mere habit, now served as a lifeline, anchoring me to a reality that was harsh but undeniably my own. In my quest for clarity, I sought the counsel of a therapist, a professional who, unlike the sterile confines of a courtroom or the indifferent backdrop of the city, could offer insights into the labyrinth of my emotions. In our sessions, I delved into the root of my pain, confronting not only the betrayal inflicted by Isabel but also the vulnerabilities within myself. The therapist's gentle guidance helped me understand that the wounds I carried were not solely the result of her transgressions, but also reflections of my own fears and unspoken expectations. This realization was a small, yet significant, step toward accepting the end of our union. Throughout this process, I began to rebuild my daily routine, piece by piece. I reconnected with friends, rediscovered interests that had lain dormant, and allowed myself the space to grieve, not just the loss of Isabel, but also the dissolution of the future we had planned together. Yet, despite these efforts, the specter of our past lingered like an uninvited guest, its presence a constant reminder that some bonds, once broken, leave scars that time may never fully heal. One cold evening, as I sat at a quiet cafe watching the world pass by, I felt an overwhelming surge of both sorrow and resolve. I realized that, despite the bitterness of our parting, I had reached a crossroads where I could no longer allow the ghost of what once was to dictate my future. The pain, as deep as it ran, was a testament to the love that had once filled my life, a love that, despite its eventual corruption, had defined me in ways I was only beginning to comprehend. In that moment of clarity, I accepted that the separation was not just an ending, but also a painful but necessary rebirth. The hostility that had defined our final days now permeated every interaction and memory. Isabel's name became synonymous with betrayal, and our shared history, a tapestry woven with both passion and deceit, lay in tatters around me. Yet, amid the ruins, I found a sliver of determination. The future was uncertain, and the path ahead was fraught with the lingering echoes of past hurts. But it was also a blank slate, a chance to redefine who I was beyond the confines of our failed marriage. As I closed this chapter of relentless isolation and painful introspection, I couldn't help but wonder if the seeds of a new beginning might someday sprout from the ashes of what had been. The journey ahead was uncharted, and every step was a reminder that the road to healing was neither straight nor smooth. Nevertheless, I resolved to face the coming days with the quiet fortitude that had slowly been forged in the crucible of my despair. The painful reality of our hostile breakup was etched into my heart, a scar that would always serve as a reminder of the fragility of trust and the enduring resilience of the human spirit. As the last traces of our shared life began to crumble, the final chapter of our story unfolded with a cold, unyielding clarity. I, Jonathan Reed, found myself standing on the precipice of a new reality, one in which the painful memories of what had once been a passionate union were now irrevocably replaced by a bitterness that neither time nor tears could erase. The hostile dissolution of our marriage had become an undeniable fact, a reality that demanded closure, however painful it might be. The morning of our final separation dawned bleakly, as if the skies themselves mourned the end of what had once been a love so fiercely celebrated. I arrived at the courthouse with a heavy heart, each step echoing in the vast, sterile corridors that would soon witness the end of all that we had built together. The legal process, which had long been a source of torment, now reached its apex in a final, irrevocable decree. Every document signed, every witness called, felt like a small nail in the coffin of the life we once dreamed of sharing. In the quiet moments before the proceedings began, I sat alone in a cramped waiting room, my thoughts drifting back to the laughter and joy that once resonated in every corner of our home. I recalled the times when Isabel's eyes sparkled with promise and every shared glance held the unspoken assurance of a future bright with possibility. But those memories had long since been eclipsed by betrayal, a betrayal so profound that it rendered every recollection bittersweet, a stark contrast to the pain that now dominated my existence. When Isabel finally appeared at the courtroom door, the sight of her was a blow that I was scarcely prepared to endure. Her presence, once a source of comfort and belonging, now ignited in me a fury that had been simmering beneath the surface for months. The moment our eyes met, a silent war was waged, a battle of regrets, resentments, and unspoken goodbyes. There was no warmth in her gaze, only the distant coldness of a woman who had long resigned herself to the inevitable collapse of our union. The proceedings themselves were a blur of formalities and legal jargon, each word stripping away a little more of the veneer that had once masked the depth of our shared pain. The judge's voice droned on, a monotone reminder of the finality of every legal action taken that day. I could only stare blankly ahead, feeling as if I were trapped in a surreal nightmare where the person I had once loved was now a stranger on the other side of a gavel. Each clause, each stipulation of our divorce, seemed designed not only to sever our financial ties but also to etch a permanent scar in the ledger of our lives. Outside the courthouse, the air was thick with a tension that mirrored the storm raging within me. Isabel lingered by her car, her eyes avoiding mine as she fumbled with her keys. I mustered the courage to approach her, determined that our final encounter would not be marred by cowardice or regret. The conversation that ensued was terse and laden with finality, a mixture of curt statements and heavy silences that spoke volumes about the irreversible damage inflicted upon our once-cherished bond. "Jonathan," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "this is how it ends." There was no trace of the woman I had loved, only a hollow echo of regret that resonated with every syllable. I could barely respond, my throat tight with the accumulated pain of months spent drowning in sorrow. Instead, I simply nodded, acknowledging that our paths were now destined to diverge, never to cross again in the same way. The confrontation that followed was raw and unfiltered, a cathartic outpouring of the emotions that had been simmering for far too long. Words were exchanged, not in a spirit of reconciliation, but as a final battle cry against the betrayal that had torn us apart. Every accusation was met with a retort, every sigh of regret was drowned by the roar of indignation. In that heated moment, the last vestiges of any lingering affection were obliterated, leaving behind only the smoldering ruins of a love that had once been. There was no room for compromise, no possibility of understanding. Our hearts had become battlefields, scarred beyond the reach of any healing touch. As the confrontation reached its climax, I could sense that the moment of finality was upon us. Isabel's eyes, once full of life and tenderness, now reflected only the resignation of a person who had resigned herself to the consequences of her choices. With a final, bitter sigh, she turned away, stepping into her car and driving off into the uncertain future. The sound of her engine faded into the distance, a haunting reminder that some chapters are meant to close permanently, with no promise of reconciliation. Left standing on that rain-slicked sidewalk, I felt an overwhelming sense of solitude that was at once both liberating and devastating. The pain of her absence was a wound that would take far longer to heal than any physical injury, and yet there was a strange solace in knowing that the charade was finally over. I had faced the brutal truth head-on, a truth that confirmed what I had suspected for so long: the love we once shared had been irreparably tainted, and the only way forward was through an unyielding, hostile severance. In the days that followed our final separation, I struggled to reconcile the man I had been with the person I was forced to become. The remnants of our shared life haunted me in every familiar place: the empty room where her laughter once echoed, the silent kitchen that now bore the weight of every unsaid goodbye. I sought refuge in long walks through the city and in the quiet solitude of my apartment, where I tried to rebuild the fragments of my identity from the ashes of a love betrayed. Yet, amidst the lingering sorrow, I discovered a resolute strength that I never knew existed. The process of separation, as painful as it was, had awakened in me a determination to reclaim control over my own destiny. I began to piece together a future that was mine alone, one that was defined not by the ghosts of the past but by the promise of a new beginning. The road ahead was fraught with uncertainty, and the scars of our breakup would remain as a constant reminder of the fragility of trust. But with every step, I was learning to embrace the possibility of healing, however elusive it might seem. The final severance from Isabel was not a moment of celebration, but rather a solemn acknowledgement of the end of a tumultuous journey. It was a bittersweet farewell to the life we had once envisioned together, a life that, despite its initial splendor, had become mired in betrayal and hostility. In that parting, I found both a painful closure and a hopeful spark for the future, however faint it might be. As I now sit in the quiet of a modest apartment, far removed from the memories of our former home, I am left to ponder the lessons of a love lost and the enduring resilience of the human spirit. The hostile breakup may have cast a long shadow over my heart, but it has also illuminated a path toward self-discovery and redemption. The pages of my journal bear witness to a painful yet transformative journey, one that has taught me that sometimes, the only way to honor the past is to forge ahead into an uncertain future, armed with the strength born of adversity. This is the final chapter of our story, a narrative marked by the harsh reality of betrayal, the relentless pursuit of truth, and the ultimate realization that some bonds, once broken, can never be mended. As the curtain falls on what was once a shared dream, I stand firm in the knowledge that every ending, no matter how bitter, holds within it the seeds of a new beginning. And so, with a heart both heavy and hopeful, I step forward into the unknown, ready to embrace the promise of a future that is entirely my own.